Hello, my name is Max, and my story has been a whirlwind of surprising twists and coincidences. Life has thrown me the strangest curveballs. From a childhood spent in a trailer park to navigating the complexities of adulthood, I've realized that fate has a funny way of leading us down the most unexpected paths. As you can imagine, growing up in a trailer park wasn't the easiest thing in the world. It all traces back to my parents' marriage several decades ago. After they tied the knot, they opened a very successful clothing store in their neighborhood. I was born a few years later, and the three of us lived a rich and fulfilling life, even if it was short-lived. But as the years went by and a punishing recession came along, my parents fell on some financially harsh times. They could no longer keep up with the mounting expenses of the clothing store, nor could they manage the expensive house bills. I was awfully young, but I remember all the painful days that followed. My parents had let go of some of their nearest and dearest staff members who dutifully served them for so long. I recall faint memories of my own running through the store and playing hide and seek with my kindergarten friends. To watch my parents pull the shutter on their store forever was heartbreaking. They'd tried to cut every corner imaginable to save costs, but it was still too much. They were in steep debt, and closing shop was their only alternative. Neither of them even had supportive families to guide them through this storm. They both came from dysfunctional homes with no caring friends, siblings, or anyone in their corner to help them out. My parents broke the news to me after I returned home from school one day. I vividly remember that sense of hopelessness, that dreadful feeling that our life would no longer be the same ever again. Finally, with nowhere else to turn and with a heavy heart, we moved into a small trailer park a few miles away from what used to be home. Transitioning to the trailer park itself took a long time, but it took an even longer time to think of it as home. The first few months were the toughest. Everything we were once used to now seemed well beyond our reach. And living in a trailer park naturally meant that we weren't surrounded by the best lot. The kids were tough, their parents were tougher, and my family and I initially struggled a lot with this new way of life. Everything seemed so much smaller. It was clear that we were going to have to adapt considerably to this new setting. Uncertainty loomed large over us, and the worst part was that nagging feeling of not knowing when or if this would ever end. I remember the first unforgettable interaction with my father as soon as we entered our trailer. "Well, here we are, Dad. Is this our new home? Just for now, son. Are we going back?" We will soon. We have to stay strong, Max. But we are going back, right? Yes, we'll get there eventually. It's all going to be better, Max. I wish I'd held no expectations, because that better would never arrive. And even though I was only a child, I had to quickly adjust to life's ever-changing realities. Given that my parents were both working double shifts, I quickly understood that I had to pull my own weight as well. I saw a flyer outside a local supermarket one evening and was able to secure a job as a bagger. The pay was next to nothing, but as long as some money came my way, it didn't matter all that much to me. My parents couldn't afford school either, so I had to homeschool myself in our trailer. I would save my monthly paycheck to buy whichever books interested me, and I would spend hours reading them at night. I would sit outside the trailer and read those books under the night sky. It wasn't ideal, but those memories were forever etched in my mind. As a child, there was so much I wanted to accomplish and explore, but the last thing I wanted to do was burden my parents. They barely had any time for themselves, let alone time for me. I often spent those first years at the park alone, working all day and reading books under the midnight stars, wondering what was to become of my future. Looking back, I suppose I shouldn't have worried so much, but it was, beyond a doubt, quite a different time then. I can't deny that I struggled socially and often grew incredibly bored and lonely. My parents were my only company, but they were rarely in the trailer except for nighttime. Their only routine was to work overtime, come home and rest, and then back at it again the next morning. I grew starved for the company after a point, and the books I could afford were my only solace at one point. My parents, who'd always been fun-loving and supportive, had begun to grow weary too. I couldn't blame them. The environment and our sudden transition to this life weren't easy at all. I remember my father getting furious with me one evening from the sheer exhaustion on his mind. I could never forget that day. It was the first time he'd ever raised his voice at me. "Dad, I wanted to talk to you." "What is it, Max?" "I've just been getting a bit bored and bored." "And you think your mom and I aren't?" "No, that's not what I. Just be grateful we can still afford this trailer and some food on your plate." Be content with what you have, Max. Dad, I'm not saying. Should we call for a clown now just because you're bored? How about an entire circus? Dad. Well, what is it? I'm tired too, Max. But we're doing the best we can, aren't we? So just shut up. I could hardly believe my ears at that moment. The fact that I remember this exact conversation after all this time, almost word for word, speaks volumes about how shocking it was. I'd never heard my father use such a tone. I remember crying that night, wondering when all this bitterness would end. I'd always had a fond interest in writing, but it broke my heart, knowing I would never be able to pursue it any longer. How long would I keep bagging groceries all day, return to a trailer in the evening, read books at night, and watch my parents become more tired and frustrated with each passing day? This routine grew exhausting and we were all reaching our wits' end. However, we had to make do with whatever we had. There was no choice. But my entire life changed one evening in a way I would never expect it to. It wasn't anything significant at the moment, but I had no idea then that I'd met the person who would change my future life forever. Ironically enough, it was my birthday that evening as well. I was returning home from the grocery store, slightly later than my usual shift. It was a weekend. The store had been packed with customers, and I'd been on my toes for more than 8 hours. I was exhausted and looking forward to heading home and catching some rest. On the way back, however, I decided to take a slight detour I thought I'd help myself to. Some chocolates and a graphic novel I'd been wanting to read for ages. I'd saved up enough to ensure that despite all our circumstances, I could at least treat myself from my own pocket. I wasn't sure if my parents even remembered my birthday, given how they had so much on their plate now. I entered the neighborhood and walked towards my trailer. There was an isolated stretch of road that led to all the trailers. While walking along that route, 2 boys suddenly emerged around me. I'd seen them a couple of times around the trailer park, but I was instantly aware that they meant trouble. The 2 of them circled me, both towering in height. The tallest one, known as Franco, stepped forward. "Hello there. Max, right? That's your name?" "Yes." My body tensed up. There was something sinister in his voice. Another boy, named Ernest, came closer. "That's a nice comic you got there, and those chocolates look tasty." Thanks. Mind sharing?" I didn't say another word, instead carefully thinking of my next course of action. "You don't want to share, huh? It's actually my birthday and I should really get going." I took 2 steps backward. Unfortunately, those boys noticed it immediately. "Thinking of sneaking away, are you?" "No, that's not what I..." "Hey Ernest, he's thinking of running away. What do you think we should do?" "Listen, I'm not running. I think we've been polite enough. Time to teach him a lesson." Before I could process what was happening, the pair of boys leapt at me. Franco stole the chocolates and stuffed them down his pockets while Ernest took away the comic book. I remember lying motionless on the ground, still processing what was going on. They kept kicking at me, splashing mud all over my clothes, and hitting me until my body ached. I don't remember how long it lasted, but the pain felt endless. All I recall were the trees around me, the mud being splashed on my body and face, and the sound of traffic drowning my cries for help. I wished for it to end so badly, and then a voice emerged. "Hey, leave him alone." Franco and Ernest stopped beating me and turned around to face someone. I lifted my head off the ground, injured but curious to see who it was. It was a young kid, perhaps the same age as the 3 of us. He seemed so much shorter in comparison. He had a timid voice but an unmistakable confidence in him. Franco and Ernest smiled, almost sadistically. "We got a little fighter here. Well, let's take care of him then." They attacked this young kid who tried desperately to defend himself but was obviously no match for these towering bullies. I slowly got up from the ground and tried to help him out, getting a single punch in before Franco knocked me back down. After they seemed done with us, the 2 of them murmured something and bolted away, leaving both this kid and me on the ground, still recovering. The young kid sprang to his feet surprisingly fast and wiped all the mud off himself. He helped me off the ground too. "Hey, you all right?" "I guess so." "I'm Alfie." "I'm Max. Nice to meet you." "How'd you get up so quickly?" "Eh? It's something of a routine now with them." The 2 of us laughed softly. We were both severely bruised and injured, struggling with the pain, but we walked back home together. Our ribs ached and our arms were scratched, but it helped to have someone by my side. Turns out that Alfie not only lived in the same trailer park, but he was in the neighboring trailer. We continued talking for a while until I reached my trailer. He walked up to his trailer, where his parents seemed annoyed, and ushered him inside, while I entered my trailer alone. I freshened myself up, cleaned up the minor injuries, and rested for a few hours. I couldn't get this boy out of my head how defiantly he'd stood up for me. I wonder how much. Worse it would have been had Alfie not intervened. Little did I know that this kid would become one of the most integral people in my life. My parents walked into the trailer late at night, although much earlier than they usually did, and for the first time in months, I'd seen them smiling. They revealed a small cake and began singing a birthday tune. I couldn't believe that despite everything, they didn't forget my birthday. Happy birthday, Max. We love you, dear. Mom, Dad, you didn't have to. Don't give me that nonsense. I know we haven't been around much, but there's no way we were forgetting today. It's our son's birthday. Despite the obvious pain, I couldn't help smiling. The two of them leaned in for a hug, but that's when they noticed the bruises. Max, what is this? Who did this? It's nothing, This looks really bad. What happened? Did someone attack you? My mind began racing with possible answers to tell them. I was conflicted about whether to tell them the truth or simply let it go. I didn't want them to worry any further, given that those boys lived close by and my parents would then be worried sick each day. I wish I could have told them, perhaps it would have eased my burden there and then. I even hated lying to them, but I distinctly remember how tired. Their eyes looked despite their enthusiasm for my birthday. It was extremely difficult to lie to them, but not wanting to ruin this moment, I decided to let it go. There was this biker coming down the trailer route and I bumped into him. He was cycling recklessly and I just got a few bruises, that's all. It hurt a lot for a few hours, but it's honestly fine now. Max, is that really what happened? You're sure, son? You're not lying, right? My heart skipped a beat. But I didn't want to burden them. Looking back, I should have perhaps just been honest, but my life wouldn't have turned out the same way if I hadn't dealt with it myself. I would have never met Alfie. I'm not lying, you know me. It was just some stupid biker is all. My parents didn't seem entirely convinced but reiterated that I needed to take better care of myself. They even bandaged me and took special care of me that day. It was a beautiful night afterward though, as we cut the birthday cake, and my parents even gifted me some extra money. I spoke to them about meeting Alfie by chance and how he was our neighbor, and they were pleased to hear that I'd found someone to interact with in the park. I hadn't seen my parents so carefree and happy in ages, and for a moment, it felt nostalgic to regain our lost sense of normalcy. At around 11 p.m., as the day drew to a close, I stepped outside the trailer for my daily dose of reading under the sky. And that's when I saw Alfie loitering outside. He was playing with some toy figures. The whole park was quiet except for Alfie, me, and a small group of adults who were far away from us. Hey, Alfie! Alfie saw me and his face immediately lit up. He came over to me and we sat together on the steps of my trailer. I could still see the visible marks and bruises on his face. How are you holding up? I'm fine, I cleaned up. How about you, how are you doing? Well, if by cleaned up you mean got yelled at and beaten up by my parents, then yeah, I'm pretty clean. I was shocked to hear how coolly he spoke about his parents' mistreatment of him and brushed it off with humor. My heart sank and I wondered how he remained so cheerful given his circumstances. But I would later learn that he was always this way. Despite living in a trailer park with abusive parents, Alfie remained a joyous kid, finding humor even in the most terrible situations. Sitting on those trailer steps, Alfie and I spoke to each other all night. I even mentioned to him that it was my birthday, to which he offered me one of his toy balls, something I've kept with me to this day. I told him everything about my parents and myself, mainly what our life used to be before all this. I shared with him stories about the dressing store and my friends until we ended up in the park. I even shared with him my dreams of becoming an author. Alfie shared stories of his own, describing how his parents got defrauded of all their savings by a swindler, and they were forced to move into the park and would take out their frustrations regularly on Alfie. He'd even told them about Franco and Ernest, but they just told him to toughen up. My heart broke for this kid, and it seemed that after all this time of being alone, I'd finally found a friend in the park. As the months passed by, Alfie and I continued to remain great friends, and our bond only strengthened. He wasn't the toughest kid, but he was certainly the smartest. Alfie was a mathematical genius and truly one of the brightest minds I'd seen. He was determined to be a wealthy businessman someday. I want to be one of those suave men in suits and working in those tall skyscrapers, like the movies. We'll see, Alfie. I honestly admired his passion and joy. It was infectious, and it amazed me how he found light even in darkness. Soon enough, we became incredible companions. I introduced Alfie to my parents too, and even called him over to my trailer whenever things got rough with his parents. As someone with no siblings, it felt great to have this bond with Alfie, and he felt almost like a brother. I even began saving up part of my paycheck for him so that he could buy himself whatever he needed. There was this strong sense of friendship that no matter how dire our circumstances got, the two of us looked out for each other. I began buying some mathematical and business books for Alfie as he seemed to greatly enjoy those, and I was more than happy to purchase them for him, hoping he could become the businessman he wanted to someday. I was uncertain about my own future plans, but I did hope to study writing and perhaps move to the city with a scholarship. It all felt like a giant and impossible dream back then, but who could have blamed us? We were thrown into a seemingly hopeless situation, and all we could do was dream. Life did become monotonous, but at the same time, it still felt exciting to think of the near future and to have someone like Alfie by my side. The two of us spent the last few months narrowly avoiding Franco and Ernest, with the occasional run-ins which didn't end well. We fought back and endured a few hits and punches, but nothing too bad. However, neither of us could have ever imagined what would our next encounter look like. We weren't remotely prepared. In a rather ironic twist of fate, the day of the brutal encounter happened to be Alfie's birthday as well. It was the end of the month, and therefore the day I collected my paycheck. I bought a few of Alfie's favorite chocolates for him and a miniature car toy I just knew he'd love. I headed back to the park, eager to celebrate his birthday. Usually, Alfie would be sitting on the steps of his trailer or roaming around within the park area, but he was nowhere to be found today. Worried, I searched the premises, running up and down the area, but to no avail. I banged on the door to his trailer, and his parents answered, clearly annoyed. "What is it? Who are you?" "I'm sorry to bother you, but I've been looking for Alfie and I can't seem to find him anymore." "So what do you want me to do?" "I'm just worried that he's perhaps gotten in some kind of trouble with those older kids in the park." "Well, that's his business, isn't it? Don't come crying to me about it. Please. It's his birthday. I wished him this morning, and that's all he's going to get. Wherever he is, he'll be back later. Now scram." He slammed the door on my face. I couldn't understand how Alfie's parents could be so cold and uncaring regarding their son. Beating him up was worse enough, but to be unbothered about his whereabouts on his birthday was just pathetic. I searched around the park frantically for a few more minutes and returned to my trailer, tired and worried. My mind raced with all different possibilities, and I couldn't imagine where Alfie might have wandered off. And that's when I saw a small piece of paper stuck to the door of my trailer. I grabbed it, read the scribbled handwriting, and felt my blood run cold. "Come get birthday boy up in the hills about a mile from here. You have until 8 p.m. Before his time's up, come alone." I suddenly felt dizzy, and this mix of fear and helplessness came over me. I immediately checked the time on a watch given to me by my father. It was 6:36 p.m. I had to make it to those hills before it was too late. I couldn't stop thinking about what possible dangers lay there. Was it just Franco and Ernest? A fortnight ago, I'd seen Franco bring a few more boys into the camp, who looked much older, taller, and meaner. What if they were with him? My parents sprung to mind too. They were usually home by 10 p.m. I couldn't wait that long, lest something happened to Alfie. How would they react? Would I return home safely? Whatever this meeting in the hills was, I had to find out on my own. It was foolish of me to not carry anything, not even something like a harmless BB gun. All I remember when I think of that situation was bolting toward the hill, just worried for Alfie. It took me around 20 minutes of sprinting to finally arrive at the base of the hill. I was breathless and exhausted, but only fueled by a desire to make sure things were okay. But when I arrived at the given location, my worst fears were confirmed to be true. Franco, Ernest, and a whole bunch of boys were sitting together in a circle. Once they took notice of me, they immediately jumped onto their feet. "Well, well, well, our knight in shining armor's here." All of them burst into laughter. While I only searched for Alfie, he was sitting on a rock with one of the older boys holding him tight. "Max." Just hearing his scared voice made me run forward, but the group warned me to stay back and not come any closer. Easy now. You want your friend, don't you? The older boy flicked open a switchblade and held it at Alfie's neck. I remember my heart beating faster than it ever had. Now, we heard you were getting the birthday boy here a treat, so let's have it, and the rest of your paycheck too. Please just let him go. I'll give you the money, let me just keep his gift, please. It doesn't work that way. You hand in everything, or else that big guy over there is pretty experienced with that blade. I honestly couldn't recall a time I'd been so stressed in my entire life. The older boy held the blade closer to Alfie's neck, and the poor boy started to whimper. Let me walk over to the big guy, hand him everything, and let me take Alfie home. Not so fast. Ernest will come to get the things, you stay right there. I had a plan in mind, well, somewhat. I had to make a move and save Alfie, but also be mindful of doing anything rash I couldn't risk either of our lives. I don't trust you. What's the guarantee that if I just stand here and hand the money over, you won't beat the two of us? I guess you'll just have to trust me. Please, he's shaking like a leaf. I just want to make sure he's okay. Franco considered this for a moment, and Ernest eventually gave him the push he needed. Let him go there, Franco. We've beaten the crap out of this kid plenty of times. He's no fighter. To my surprise, Franco allowed me to walk over to Alfie, and that's all I needed. The older boy kept aside the switchblade, and I saw Alfie's face turn to one of temporary relief, and that's when I seized my chance. Alfie, run. Now. I pushed Alfie away, freeing him from the older boy's grip. Before the boy could react, I punched him across the face with as much force as I could. Alfie watched in shock, but I urged him to run away, and he did. He sprinted away to safety, and my mind was at ease only momentarily. Before the group of boys leaped onto me, stunned by my actions, I put up a strong fight and was able to knock away two of the older boys. I punched Franco across his face too. I kept thrashing them senselessly, the adrenaline rush filling me up. I never forgot their shocked faces as I landed blow after blow. But it didn't take long for an entire group to overpower a single kid on his own. Within a few minutes, I was pinned to the ground and attacked. It was quite possibly the worst beating I'd ever experienced. I felt punch after punch on me, so much that I even lost track of time. After they were done, the group fled the scene with all my money and belongings, leaving me lying on the base of the hill. It took a long time for me to pick myself up and walk back to the park, but I somehow managed to limp my way to my trailer. But if I thought I'd experienced the worst these boys could do to me, I was absolutely unprepared. The door to my trailer was left ajar and the glass windows on the side were smashed. I limped inside and couldn't believe what I saw. The entire trailer had been turned upside down and vandalized. I wasn't sure if anything had been stolen, but most of the furniture and pretty much everything else had been ruined. It was perhaps the worst day of my entire life. The events that followed this were a blur. Everything after the beating that night seemed hazy to me. I remember my parents coming home, their horrified faces looking at both my injuries and the state of the trailer. I still recall my mother tending to me while my father searched the entire park in desperate pursuit of Franco and his gang. Unfortunately, they had disappeared, and unbeknownst to any of us, they would never return to the park again. My parents spent the entire night cleaning up the trailer, even covering up the windows with cardboard. I could barely catch any sleep given everything that had just happened. The guilt and exhaustion were just too much. Just then, Alfie knocked on the door to our trailer. My parents were fast asleep, but I was awake and could hear him clearly. Max, are you all right? I want to talk to you. I really hope you're okay. I don't know what came over me that night, but I decided not to respond. I was still reeling from the aftermath of both, the destruction of our trailer as well as the terrible beatings. And even though I could hear his desperation for me to respond, I quietly slept off, thinking I would talk to him the next morning. It's funny though how the seemingly harmless decisions we make can become the most consequential, because the next morning, both Alfie and his trailer were missing. As I woke up, I found a thick roll of money, which had been slid in from under our trailer door. It was held together with a rubber band, which I removed to find a handwritten note within the roll. The roll itself was a significant amount of money. Immediately worried about who'd sent it, I began reading the note. For so you can become the big city author you've always wanted to be. This is all the pocket money I had, so you better spend it right. A million questions flooded my mind, the main one being, where had he gone? An old man who lived in the opposite trailer said that they'd gone south to Alfie's relatives and that they wouldn't be back. I felt a profound mix of feelings, overwhelmed by guilt and regret, but also happiness. It pained me that it was possibly the last time I would see Alfie and that he lent me his entire pocket money and just left. And in the months and years that followed, I often had sleepless nights, wondering where he was, how his parents reacted to everything, and most importantly, whether he was okay. But I never found the answers to those burning questions back then. I temporarily quit my job as a bagger to study and apply to some of the universities across the city. I spent a lot of time writing rough drafts of ideas and stories I wanted to pen down. And then one day, aid came in the most unexpected way possible. One night, my father came over to me excitedly. "Max, your mother and I have been discussing things. We've saved a lot and we want to send you to the city. For your education." I couldn't believe my ears. It was honestly the best possible news. After everything, life seemed to finally take an upward turn. My parents insisted that they wanted to see me grow and prosper. A month later, I was leaving the house with bittersweet memories. As tumultuous as life in the trailer park life had been, it felt strange letting it all go and leaving everyone and everything behind. But I had to embrace life moving forward. As if Alfie's money wasn't significant enough, my parents gave me additional funds to take care of myself and assured me that I would be able to handle the rest. It felt like a turning chapter in my life, and with their support and my dream of writing finally within my reach, it seemed like things were looking up. For a moment again, it felt like the old days, and I was hopeful once more. I left early for the train station and waited patiently for the city train, scared but excited to begin this new chapter. But I would be utterly blindsided by the events that were to come. As I was about to get on board with a heavy suitcase, a boy as old as me came to assist me. "That's okay, I got it. Let me help you to your seat. I can manage just fine. It's all right." No, please let me help you out. I'm going to the city too, and I'm a bit scared, so I want some company. Happy to help another fellow local heading to the city. I was curious about this boy's behavior. I'd never met him before, and his hospitality surprised me. But his mention of being scared of city travel struck a chord with me, and thus I decided to tag along with him. Little did I know, this would be one of the worst decisions I would ever make in my life. As I sat and conversed with this boy throughout the train ride, I genuinely felt a sense of camaraderie. A fellow passenger my age, as nervous to embark upon city life as much as me, it should have certainly been a nice friendship, but that would never happen. My first intuition should have been his constant staring down the aisle of the train as if he were waiting for someone, but I foolishly ignored my instinct. As the train reached the main city a few hours later, I got down and the boy helped me with my bag. "There's a quicker exit towards that side. Follow me." "But I thought you're new here." "Oh yes, I just heard about this from a few city folks long back. Now come along." Something didn't sit right with me then, and now that I think of everything that happened, it felt as though I'd walked straight to my demise. As we reached the corner exit, the boy suddenly turned around and whistled. I was immediately on guard. Who was he calling? A few boys hurried towards us and then I saw them. It couldn't be. I felt queasy and my whole world seemed to shake with fear. Well, if it isn't Richie who snuck away to the city. This was the worst situation I could have ever dreamt of. To make matters worse, there was nobody here by my side, nobody to support me. I was a stranger to the city, surrounded by violent and familiar bullies. There was no way out. This time Franco had a switchblade. "You better hand over everything or I'll beat you up for good this time." I was still recovering from injuries left by them during the hill encounter. Even though I resisted this attack, the group of boys were too powerful and my injuries made it significantly difficult to fight them off. They didn't hit me as much, but they tossed me to the ground with a few punches and took away everything there was. "See you later, Richie. We'll find you when we want more." Everything I had on me was gone: the suitcase, the money given by both Alfie and my parents. It was all gone with Franco and his gang. I was back to square one, but in completely new territory. It was a miracle I even survived given the circumstances, but I wouldn't have been able to do so without Sharon. I slept near a homeless shelter that evening, cold, starving, and with nothing on me. I thought of begging someone for a train ticket back home, but I couldn't go back penniless, especially after my parents sent me here with so much money and support. How could I go back? What would I even say? I decided I had to find a way to survive here on my own. There was a restaurant that opened up the next morning and I visited it immediately, trying to convince the manager about my situation and the possibility of getting hired. Figuring me to be a homeless person trying to scam him, the manager was insistent on sending me away. But I had no idea that just behind him and listening intently was a girl my age working at the restaurant, the girl who would forever change my life here. As I waited out near the restaurant, thinking about my next steps, the same girl approached me once her shift was done. "Hi, my name's Sharon." "I'm Max." "I'm sorry, I couldn't help overhearing your conversation with my manager back there." "Well then, you know my situation now. I'm pretty desperate. I don't know about this place, but there's another joint down the street you could try. I have a friend working there and he could help you too." "That would be perfect. Thank you so much." I never quite understood why Sharon was so giving and kind even to a complete stranger. It was one of her qualities that amazed me. The chances of being in a city, all by yourself and meeting a stranger with a heart of gold were near zero, and yet here she was. Unbeknownst to Sharon, she'd just changed my life. I got a job at the restaurant she mentioned where I met her friend Roger. Through Roger, I was even able to find a room for rent, and the two of us stayed as roommates. It was the start of a beautiful friendship as Roger, Sharon, and I began hanging out together. We would work day shifts and spend our nights working on our passions. Sharon was an excellent singer and aspired to become a musical icon. Roger, on the other hand, was a very talented stand-up comedian and would get the occasional gigs at a local bar. As for me, I never ended up going to university, but once I searched enough, I was able to land a job as a junior reporter for a local newspaper. The pay wasn't much, but the experience was life-altering. As I grew comfortable with my job and my two companions in the city, the years just flew by. I worked a dozen or so odd jobs, but I kept writing all the way through. It didn't slip any of our minds as 12 years passed by until Roger had to move out of our shared apartment. He'd found success as a comedian and had begun touring across the country as part of groups, and he would never be in the same place for a while again. It was heartbreaking to watch him leave 12 years later, but as long as he was successful, it's all I could have asked for. Sharon found success too, as a country musician, and shifted to another city once she got married. As for me, I'd landed a job as an assistant editor at a very reputable publishing firm. Over the years, I visited my parents back home with bittersweet memories. I'd begun earning enough and even bought them a new house. Nothing brought me more happiness than to gift them a home after all this time, and they were just abundantly happy to see me grow. Despite having a credible career and a novel in the making, life became lonely in the city. Without Roger or Sharon, it felt pretty isolating. My boss at work didn't exactly help matters either. His name was Derek, and he was just downright arrogant. Working directly under him, I was consistently blamed for his wrongs. My input was often ignored, and when I was an intern, it was far worse. There was even a statement he'd say which became a favorite line of his. "If it's cheap, dull, and boring, hand over the copies to Max. It suits him." It angered me greatly each time he'd say this, but there was little I could do since he was my boss. The absence of Roger and Sharon and Derek's imposing nature affected me greatly for the longest time. Each book of my own that I'd hand him was often rejected outright too. But the defining moment of my life came one night during a merger dinner. Our company was merging with a large media conglomerate to expand its catalog. But I had no idea that this would be the night that permanently changed my life. I could have never predicted how it would unfold. I was leaving early from work that evening. Sharon and her husband were in the city, and I wanted to catch dinner with them. But Derek emerged in my office. "You're leaving?" "Yes, I've got." "I don't care. You're going straight home, changing, and then coming with me for the merger dinner." "I thought you and the senior editors were the only ones going." "Well, I've changed my mind. I want the whole team there. Let's go." "I have a dinner reservation with some friends. They've flown in from." "You'll get dinner here too." "Now come on, don't argue with me. I'm giving you an address, pick up my iron suit from there, and meet me at the restaurant directly." Before I could even protest, Derek marched out. I couldn't believe I had to cancel dinner with Sharon and her partner. I hadn't seen them in a year. Frustrated but with no other alternative, I rushed home to change, collected Derek's suit, and dutifully went to the restaurant. But this one change in my schedule is what made me believe in true miracles. There was a large group of people at the restaurant. It was a luxury place, a kind I'd never seen before. I found Derek amid the crowd, and he seemed quite annoyed. "There you are. Hand me my suit, you idiot. I've been waiting for 11 minutes. This doesn't matter to you, but it does to me because unlike you, we're all important here." I held my tongue given the crowd and the gravity of the dinner. It was painful enough to endure Derek's taunts, let alone at such an important dinner. But then came the bombshell. "Max, you fool! Come here, let me introduce you to another junior editor of the partnering firm. This is my nephew, Lucas." I remember freezing at that moment. It was unmistakable, and he seemed to recognize it too, but didn't acknowledge it. It was the same boy who'd led me to the train exit 12 years ago. He'd led me directly to Franco and left me alone in the city. You're the same guy who... Ignore him, Lucas. He keeps babbling. Anyway, let me introduce you to some of the senior partners here. Derek took Lucas away as I registered the full gravity of the situation. The fact that Lucas was even present here, let alone Derek's nephew, was still something I could barely comprehend. The entire dinner became awkward as I couldn't take my mind off either Lucas or Derek, two bullies who continued to torment me. Derek and Lucas stuck close throughout the dinner, while I only wondered what this meant for my position at the firm. Would Derek replace me with his nephew? I was distracted throughout. As the dinner drew to a close, I kept on worrying about this possibility until Derek stood up to make an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we conclude this dinner, I want to thank all of you for joining hands with our company. We look forward to a beautiful partnership, and as my most eager employee suggested himself, he would like to pay for drinks and dinner for all. Max, it's all on you, buddy." My already confused mind started to spin. Everyone in the room began chuckling and wishing me luck. I saw Lucas giggling and instantly realized it was his idea. I glared at Derek, ready to finally say something to him. And that's when I felt a hand on my shoulder, the moment that would change everything. A suave businessman leaned in from behind, took the bill from me, and smiled. Everyone suddenly went quiet, admiring him. I couldn't understand who he was. Turns out he was the partnering firm's CFO. But I didn't fully recognize him until he smiled and winked at me. There was no way. It just couldn't be. "Remember me?" I nearly cried. It was impossible to believe it was him, after all this time. Alfie, in the flesh. The two of us embraced one another, and everyone seemed confused. Derek seemed scared even. You two know each other?" "Oh, it's a very long story." The two of us simply couldn't stop smiling. Alfie turned to both Derek and Lucas. "Putting an expensive bill onto a junior employee isn't the best career move, Derek. And your nephew, Lucas, isn't working as hard as he should be. We both know he got in at our company because you put a word in, but we'll have to see about the two of you. I'll have to talk to the CEO about some strong restructuring." I'd never seen Derek's face that shocked, but it was truly a historic moment. I could barely believe I'd met Alfie after all this time. He paid for the entire bill and we left the restaurant in his luxury car. We had decades worth of conversations to catch up on. But as we were about to leave, Alfie asked his driver to take us to a homeless shelter. I was pretty confused. There were 2 leftover food bags from the restaurant. "I need you to do something. There are 2 homeless people in that corner against the fence. Just go and drop the food over to them and we'll leave." I couldn't understand the reasoning for these specific men back then, except that it would be the most cathartic moment of my life. I walked over to those 2 men with the food bags and paused. I'd had enough shocks for one night, but this was unbelievable. Franco, Ernest. The 2 of them looked up and seemed to recognize me. Their faces went cold. "Hey trailer kid, we don't need food. Lend us some money, we beg you. Please, let's not think about the past, eh? Just some money, please. No food, we want money." I simply dropped the 2 food bags and returned to Alfie's car as we drove away. I hope that felt great. It was amazing. How did you find them? When did you move here? Well, it's a long story, but we've got all the time we need. It felt incredibly satisfying to think how things turned out after everything. Franco, Ernest, Derek, and Lucas all getting what they deserved was the biggest relief and justice I could have asked for, and to see Alfie have grown so much and thriving brought me the greatest joy imaginable. It was honestly a miraculous night with my lifelong friend being rediscovered and justice being served.